For each fight on this weekend's upcoming card, including for the prelims, I'm going to be comparing stats, reviewing recent fighter history, analyzing the results of my 7 data science prediction models, and giving a combined weighted prediction based on those models. I'll also provide my final prediction combining both quantitative and qualitative information together. Later this week, I'll upload a video covering promising underdogs, best and expensive favorites, and prop bets for y'all to consider, which I'll highlight some great opportunities for you guys. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, find value bets, or just informative and entertainment purposes to prepare for the lead up to this weekend's event. Please like and subscribe if you find this content interesting, informative, or helpful. It helps keep me motivated to create these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you'd like to support the channel through that. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which will give you early access to all of the analysis and results for my videos, as well as additional data analysis and stats. So that includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best and expensive favorites, prop bets to consider, and a deep dive into each fighter's record history and an analysis through each of their individual historical fights. So you'll get all sorts of stats and data analysis which will help you with your picks and bets. And for 20 bucks a month, which is around $5 per event, you can get all of that information. You can purchase event analysis separately, but the membership is cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping improve and expand the content of this channel. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, the fight simulations, and updating the site takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate your support. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. It truly means the world to me that we can share our passion for MMA and continue to build this community together. The last thing that I want to mention is that there is a BetUS promotion in the description below. If you use that link, it's an affiliate link, so if you set up your account, you'll get a promotional offer with that. I'm excited to continue working on this analysis and content for you all. Thank you guys again for all of your support. Let's go ahead and dive right into the predictions. We're going to make the most out of this fight night card. We are starting with Ryan Loder versus Robert Valentin. Let's go and review their stats here. Ryan Loder, 6 feet 1 inch tall. He has a reach of 76.5 inches and he's 33 years old. Now Robert Valentin, on the other hand, he has a 1 inch height advantage. He's 6 feet 2 inches tall. He has a 2.5 reach advantage. He has 79 inch reach and he is 4 years younger at 29 years old. Now the issue with these guys' stats is that, well, they have none recorded. So this first slide means absolutely nothing other than those overview stats. So let's go ahead and jump into their records here. So first, let's start with Ryan Loder's recent fight history. Now, he is making his UFC debut this weekend, but his total record is 6 wins and 1 loss. Now, out of those 6 wins, 4 of them were via KO/TKO, and the other 2 victories were via decision, which does give him a 67% finishing rate. Now, his 1 loss was a decision loss. He does have 3 first-round finishes. Recently, he's done really well. He's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight. His most recent win was back in August of 2023, and his most recent loss was in January of 2023. So he hasn't really been active since August, but still a decent record stepping into the UFC. Now let's take a look at Robert Valentin's recent fight history. Now he is making his UFC debut as well. His total record is 10 wins and 3 losses. Now out of his 10 wins, 3 of them were via KO/TKO and 6 were via submission. And he also has 1 decision victory, which does give him a 90% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 1 of those was a KO/TKO, 1 was a submission, and 1 was a decision, so it's kind of spread out. Now, he does have 6 first-round finishes. Recently, of course, he's done really well as well. He's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 3-fight win streak. Now, his most recent win was back in December of 2023, so he's been a little bit more active than Ryan Loder. I mean, by 4 months, which is pretty minimal, but his most recent loss was back in March of 2022, so it's been a while. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't run these guys through my prediction models because of the debut here. However, the odd probabilities are giving Robert Valentin a 59% probability of victory. And now I generally do agree with that because Robert does have a height advantage of 1 inch here. He's 4 years younger than his opponent, and he has a reach advantage of 2.5 inches. Again, he's won 10 fights. He's finished 90% of them. He's recently won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 3-fight win streak back to back. But let's talk about those reasons aside from stats alone as to why Robert will likely defeat Ryan Loder. Robert Valentin has a better overall fight record. I think he has better experience as well as a fighter. I think his reach advantage is going to allow him to control the fight's distance pretty effectively throughout this fight. He also has a really good finishing ability. We've seen him pull off some strong finishes in the past before, and quite a few of them actually. I also really like his recent performance. I mean, he's on a really good winning streak, and he's just been dominant overall in a lot of his fights. A lot of people are rooting for Robert Valentin, so he does have a community support, and he's also the younger fighter who's likely entering his MMA and professional fighting prime. So there's not too much information out there on these guys, but based on what I have seen and what I've researched and what's out there, I do like Robert Valentin more, and he's likely to win this fight. I don't think you could go wrong by adding him into a parlay or something. Overall, this guy looks like a beast. I mean, look at his tattoos and stuff. The guy looks like he's about to rip Ryan Loder's head off. It's going to be an interesting fight with a prospect. Now, he could disappoint us. Like, we've seen some people who make their debut, they have a lot of hype on them. They come in and they just don't do good. And we actually saw that just a few days ago with Stuart Nickel when he got his first loss, and he was making his debut into the UFC. He had done really, really well. He got like 4 KO/TKOs in a row. Then he comes in the UFC and he just completely gets destroyed. He gets submitted within the very first round against Jesus Aguilar. So some of these guys, they have padded records and stuff. We can't really tell too many details, but I am kind of leaning on Robert here. I think he's going to be able to get it done. And to add some context here to Robert Valentin's record and who he's faced recently, let's just go down like his 3 most recent opponents and just see what their record was and, how good or terrible they were. So starting with Zoran Dodd, he defeated this guy via KO/TKO. It was within the first round, but this guy's not very good. He has no wins under his belt. He's had 4 professional fights, and he's lost all 4 of them. He's lost 3 of them via KO/TKO, and he's lost 1 via unanimous decision. He hasn't been very active either. He had a fight in 2024, 2023, 2021, and 2017. So, he fights here and there. So not a very good opponent to flex a win on. Now, before that, he had a fight against Samil Shellist, a guy who also has no wins. In fact, he's only ever had 1 fight, and that was against Robert Valentin, and he lost it via submission. Also not very impressive. And then we have Pietro Panini. And hopefully I'm saying that last name right. But this guy actually has a pretty decent record overall. He's Italian. He's 6 feet 1 inch tall, 31 years old right now. He's had 9 wins, 3 losses, and a draw. 3 of his wins came via KO/TKO. 2 of them came via submission. And, his losses, he was knocked out once and he was submitted once, and that submission was from Robert Valentin. So this guy, not too bad. Robert Valentin, he has some potential overall. Recently, he's kind of faced some fluffy type fighters. And when I say fluffy, I mean, not a very good record. They're kind of used to fluff his record. So he's faced these guys to fluff his record up a little bit. But that Pietro guy, he did pretty well against him. He seems like he's a guy who knows his fights. That guy even had a championship level fight back in 2018 in IFC, and I'm talking about Pietro Panini here. He fought against Leon Aliou. Hopefully I'm saying that name right. It was a championship level fight in the IFC. He ended up losing by doctor stoppage in the 4th round. But still, he had decent experience. Robert Valentin was able to defeat him. So I am leaning towards Robert Valentin here overall. And you know what? Let me take a quick look at Ryan Loder's recent fights and those guys' history. I'll break that down with you guys here just to give some context since we don't know a lot about these guys. So Ryan Loder, he's recently coming off of a win against Lajuan Davis. He beat him via unanimous decision. Now that Davis guy, he only has had 1 fight in which he lost to Ryan Loder. So again, a fluff record type of fighter. But before then, he fought Leon Shahbazyan. That was he won against him via KO/TKO, and that was in UFL. He beat him in the first round. Now Leon, his record's actually pretty decent: 7 wins, 3 losses. He has 1 KO/TKO and 6 submissions, so he was able to defeat that guy. And before that, he had a loss against Troy Green. That was a championship level fight in Uriah Faber's A1 Combat, and he did defeat him. And his record is 5 wins, 2 losses, one of those being a KO/TKO. Not a bad guy. He doesn't have as much recent fluff as Robert Valentin does, but I will say that Robert Valentin does seem like the more overall athletic, younger guy with more potential coming into the UFC. So I am kind of leaning towards Robert Valentin here, and I think that Robert Valentin gets it done via KO/TKO. He is a finisher. You could take him via submission. I mean, he does have quite a few submissions, but keep it in mind, Ryan Loder's game, I think that Robert Valentin is much more likely to land a KO/TKO against him and his fighting style compared to Ryan Loder. And the reason I say that is because we know that Robert Valentin does like getting the finish via striking and submissions. He has a reach advantage coming into this fight, and he also has a really aggressive style when he fights. And that kind of leads to this very high-paced style fight where he applies that pressure and tries to capitalize on his opponent's mistakes. And so Ryan Loder, on the other hand, now that guy's not he's not too much of a striker. He actually has a good wrestling base, and he uses that to kind of control his opponents when it comes to fighting. So based on that disadvantage, I think that Valentin should be able to pull off a KO/TKO here, and hopefully he does so in a very exciting fashion, so we can kick off this fight card in a very exciting way, but also just so he can make a strong debut and hopefully just be a non-boring prospect. I'm very tired of seeing prospective fighters making their debut and just not being very exciting to watch or technical. They just become another name, and another unranked name, and I think we're all tired of seeing guys like that. We want to see something exciting. We want to see people try. We want to see that attitude that guys like Dan Hooker have, who really enjoy fighting and enjoy the love of it. That's the kind of stuff that made us love Tony Ferguson, and so we just need more guys to be excited about fighting and show that in their style. So I'm hoping we kick off this card in a really convincing fashion. I will say though, Ryan Loder, he's not a bad fighter. We saw him on The Ultimate Fighter, and he kind of impressed on there. He was on Team Shevchenko. He defeated Tom, who was on Team Grasso here, with a first round submission, and that was pretty impressive. I mean, that really showcased his, his grappling moves and stuff like that. So he does have a chance of pulling off an upset, but I'm still thinking that if you consider logic and everything given, I would say that Valentin has a bit of a better chance of pulling off this victory. But I will respect Ryan Loder's experience and what he's done recently. Probably spent way too much time breaking that fight down. Sorry, guys. So for the next fight, we have Wang Cong versus Victoria Leonardo. Let's go and review their stats here. So Wang is 5 feet 6 inches tall. She has a reach of 66 inches, and she's 32 years old. Now, on the other hand, Victoria is 5 feet 5 inches tall, so she has a 1 inch height disadvantage here. She has a reach of 64 inches, so she has a 2 inch reach disadvantage, and she is 2 years older at 34 years old. Now, before we jump into these stats, I do want to let you guys know, because I owe it to you guys to give you guys context, that Wang's stats come from only one single fight. So I think it's important to know that when I'm about to break down these stats. So when it comes to striking, Wang lands 6.2 strikes per minute at a 82% accuracy. Now Victoria lands 3.27 strikes per minute at a 39% accuracy. Now if you didn't know that context, that would make Wang look really, really good, but keep in mind that's only from one single fight. Let's continue. So Victoria, as far as grappling goes, she lands 1.6 takedowns on average with a 27% accuracy, and Wang lands 4.89 takedowns on average with a decent accuracy. Now, when it comes to defense, Wang absorbs 0.65 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense, and Victoria absorbs 4.7 strikes per minute with a 46% striking defense and a 71% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Wang Cong's recent fight history. Now recently she's coming off of a win against Paula Luna via submission, and that was back in May of this year. Now her total record, 5 wins, 0 losses. She is undefeated. Now out of those 5 wins, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 2 were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which does give her a 60% finishing rate. Last few things I want to mention, she does have 2 first round finishes, and she's on a 5-fight win streak. Her most recent win was in May of 2024, just 3 months ago. Now let's flip over to Victoria Leonardo's recent fight history. Now recently Victoria's coming off of a loss against Natalia Silva, and that was via KO/TKO back in May of 2023, so last year. Now Victoria's total record is 9 wins and 6 losses, not the best record. Out of those 9 wins though, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 4 were submissions, and 4 were decision victories, which gives her a 56% finishing rate. Pretty average. Now out of her 6 losses, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, which is a bit concerning. 1 of them was a submission loss, and 1 was a decision loss. She does have 3 first round finishes, but recently she hasn't done too well. She's only won 2 of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off of a loss into this particular fight. Her most recent win was actually back in July of 2022, so it's been a little over 2 years, and her most recent loss was back in May of 2023, so last year. And since then, she hasn't really been active, so that's also a concern. I think that this one's pretty straightforward. Now, unfortunately, I can't run these fighters through my prediction models because of the debut. However, the odd probabilities are giving Wang an 85.3% probability of victory, and I do agree with that. I mean, she has a height advantage of 1 inch. She's 2 years younger. She has a reach advantage of 2 inches. She lands 2.93 more strikes per minute based on that one fight. She has a 43% higher striking accuracy. She absorbs 4 less strikes per minute. She has a 4% higher striking defense. She lands 3.29 more takedowns on average with a 73% higher takedown accuracy. She's won 5 fights. She's undefeated. She's finished 60% of them. She's had a road to UFC fight on a season 3 episode 2, which she defeated Paula Luna via submission on. So she's had that experience, which is good. And she's on a 5-fight win streak. So she's been killing it. But let's talk about those reasons aside from stats alone as to why Wang is likely going to defeat her opponent here. I think based on everything I've seen, I can see Wang Cong using her superior striking overall to take an advantage when it comes to striking. She has a really high rate when it comes to striking. She lands a lot of volume. She's very precise with her striking as well, and she has good power behind her strike. So I really like her when it comes to the striking aspect of fighting. I think because of her reach advantage, she should be able to capitalize on that as well. She could also kind of use her takedowns and her grappling a little bit. We've seen just a sliver of that, and you know, I think that she has potential to flex a little bit more when it comes to that. She's also pretty defensive as a fighter. She's careful. She doesn't get hit a lot. She's definitely doing more of the hitting than getting hit, and I like that. She's able to keep a good pressure and pace when it comes to fighting, and when I look at Victoria Leonardo's past, she looks a bit vulnerable when it comes to some of her fights, especially when it comes to decent strikers and grapplers, and I think that it should be pretty easy for Wang Cong to go in, look at those fights, study them, and kind of just identify some specific tactics that she could use, which would be effective against Leonardo. So, I mean, this one, again, short and sweet, very strong favorite here. I'm thinking Wang Cong wins, and I would take her winning via decision. I don't see her getting a finish, but I do definitely see her controlling the fight however she'd like, and take it to the judges and get that decision victory. For the next fight, we have Jacqueline Cavalcanti versus Josiane Nunes. Let's go and review their stats here. Jacqueline is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 26 years old. Now, Josiane Nunes is 5 feet 2 inches tall, and that's a 6-inch reach disadvantage, but she does have a reach of 67 inches, which is impressive for given that height. But that's still a 3-inch reach disadvantage compared to Jacqueline. And lastly, Nunes is 30 years old, so she's 4 years older than Jacqueline here. So before we get into the fighting stats, again, I love to give you guys context. I want to let you guys know that Jacqueline's stats come from only one fight, so keep that in mind as I'm about to break down these stats for you. So when it comes to striking, Jacqueline lands 8.4 strikes per minute, which seems crazy high, but keep what I just said in mind, and that's at a 57% accuracy. Now, Nunes, she lands 5.99 strikes per minute at a 44% accuracy. She's pretty consistent when it comes to that. When it comes to defense, Jacqueline absorbs 2.6 strikes per minute with an 84% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense. Now, Nunes absorbs 5.25 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a 58% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Jacqueline's recent fight history. Now recently, Jacqueline's coming off of a win against Zara, which was via unanimous decision back in September of last year. So it's been a little bit of time since she's been active. We're approaching a year. But her total record, not too bad. It's 6 wins and only 1 loss. And those 6 wins are broken down by 3 KO/TKOs and 3 decision victories, which gives her a perfectly even 50% finishing rate. That single loss was a decision loss. She does have 2 first-round finishes, and recently she's won 4 of her last 5 fights. And she's actually on a 4-fight win streak, so she's done very well recently. Her most recent win, of course, September of last year. Her most recent loss was actually March of 2022, so it's been a while. Now let's take a look at Nunes' recent fight history. Now recently she's coming off of a loss against Chelsea Chandler, which was via unanimous decision back in March of 2024. Now her total record, 10 wins and 2 losses. Now out of those 10 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, very impressive, and 3 were decision victories, which does give her a 70% finishing rate. Those 2 losses she has are both decision losses. Now Nunes does have 3 first-round finishes. Recently she's done well. She's won 4 of her last 5 fights, but she is recently coming off of a loss into this particular fight, which breaks that streak. Now, her most recent win was back in January of 2023, so it's been quite a while since she's gotten her victory, and her most recent loss was back in March of this year, just a few months ago, 5 months ago. So now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted for this fight, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations, takes all of that into account as well. So 6 of 7 of my prediction models right off the bat are leaning towards Jacqueline, and only 1 is leaning towards Nunes. And when I weigh those together, I'm getting a 65.6% probability of victory for Jacqueline. Now for my final prediction, I'm keeping it around that area, just I'm slightly dropping it a little bit, just given Nunes' experience and her skills. I do like that despite her having such a large height disadvantage, she still has a pretty decent reach, and that kind of makes her dangerous, especially as fights tend to continue. She continues to find her opponent and land volume continuously. But before breaking down their styles and stuff, let's go ahead and just recap some of the strengths that Jacqueline has, at least on paper. So she has a height advantage of 6 inches here. She's 4 years younger. She has a reach advantage of 3 inches. She lands 2.41 more strikes per minute. She has a 13% higher striking accuracy. She absorbs 2.65 less strikes per minute. She has a 31% higher striking defense and a 42% higher takedown defense. Keep in mind, that's only from one fight. So it's not exactly an average per se, it's just one fight's performance. Now, she has won 6 fights, and that is pretty good. She's only lost 1. She's finished 50% of those fights. She's had 1 fight in the UFC and won that single fight. Recently, she's won 4 of her last 5 fights, and she is on a 4-fight win streak, which is pretty impressive. The last time she lost, of course, was over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. It's back in March of 2022. But let's talk about those reasons aside from stats alone as to why Jacqueline should be able to get this victory here. I think that she holds several advantages over Nunes overall. I like her height and her reach superiority, and how that's going to translate in the fight is it's going to allow her to maintain a distance and control the fight and use her striking very effectively. I think she's fully capable of doing that and controlling this fight, and eventually, taking it to the judges. Can't go wrong with taking a women's MMA fight, going to the judges, and there not really being a finish there. Jacqueline is also the younger fighter here, and I think that her being young, like 26 years old, she has a lot of room to grow. She has a lot of potential, and she's going to be very adaptable and moldable as a fighter. She's going to improve constantly. So every performance we see of hers, as long as she's doing her homework and her job and studying and learning and training, we should see her get better and better as she reaches her prime eventually. So she has a lot of potential that I think we're going to see more and more of as she continues her fighting career. I like her striking capability, and I think that combined with some of her adaptability that we've seen should position her pretty well against someone like Nunes. Now, there's not much else to say on this fight. It's pretty simple and clear. I think that with Jacqueline's physical advantages here, with her striking ability and some of that technical striking and her footwork as well, with all of that and some of her defensive grappling, she should be able to kind of neutralize anything that Nunes throws at her. She should control this fight, take it to the judges, and eventually get a decision victory. For the next fight, we have Viacheslav Borshchev versus James Llontop. Let's go and review their stats here. So Viacheslav is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches and is 32 years old. Now, on the other hand, James is 6 feet tall, so he's an inch taller. He has a reach of 73 inches, so he has a 4-inch reach advantage here, and he's 25 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Viacheslav lands 5.18 strikes per minute at a 58% accuracy. Now, James, on the other hand, he lands 4.76 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. And when it comes to defense, Viacheslav absorbs 4.49 strikes per minute with a 54% striking defense and a 35% takedown defense, whereas James, on the other hand, he absorbs 2.1 strikes per minute with a 70% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense. Now, let's take a look at Viacheslav's recent fight history. Now, recently, he's coming off of a loss against Chase Hooper via submission back in May of this year. Now, his total record is 7 wins and 4 losses. Not the best record, but also not the worst. Now, out of those 7 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, pretty good, and 1 was a decision victory, which does give him a respectable 86% finishing rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 1 was a submission loss, and the other 3 were decision losses. He also has 3 first-round finishes, but recently he's done absolutely terrible. He's only won 1 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in May of 2023, and his most recent loss was in May of 2024. Now let's take a look at James's recent fight history. Now recently, James is coming off of a loss against Chris Padilla via submission back in April of this year. His total record, 14 wins and 3 losses. Very good record. Out of those 14 wins, 7 of those were KO/TKOs, 1 was a submission, and 6 were decision victories, which does give him a 57.2% finishing rate. His 3 losses are broken down by 2 submission losses and 1 decision loss. He does have 3 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this particular fight. He's done a bit better than his opponent. Coming into this fight, he has better momentum than him as well. His most recent win back in September of 2023, his most recent loss April of this year. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations and takes all of that into account as well. So 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Viacheslav Borshchev, and none are leaning towards James. And when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 72.3% probability of victory for Viacheslav. Now for my final prediction, I knocked that down just a little bit, and that's due to the fact that James does have a height advantage of 1 inch here. He is the much younger fighter of 7 years. He has a reach advantage of 4 inches. He absorbs 2.39 less strikes per minute, and he has a 16% higher striking defense and a 15% higher takedown defense. Now, the reason that I am picking Viacheslav Borshchev, despite the fact that he has struggled a little bit recently, is due to the fact that he does land more strikes per minute than his opponent here, and he's more accurate with his strikes as well. He's won 7 fights, he's finished 86% of those. He's had 6 UFC fights, which gives him pretty good experience, and he's won 2 of those. I know that's not a lot, but that still gives him pretty decent experience overall. Now again, recently I know he hasn't done too well, but stylistically I think he has advantages here over James. I like his experience in the UFC and his striking skills, and I think that those combined are going to make him a challenging opponent here for James. Keep in mind he trains at Team Alpha Male, which, you know, they have produced really good fighters overall. They have good training, and I think that that background is going to contribute in his overall preparation and strategy coming into this fight after coming off of a loss. So, and I think that that's going to add to his motivation overall as well. He's going to want to turn that last loss around very quickly and get a win under his shoulders here. So I think he's going to try to come in very aggressively and try to get a victory here against James and shut James down. I think that a huge strength of Viacheslav in this fight is his striking ability. I mean, he's a solid striker. He has some good technical skills as well. He has faster hands than James, in my opinion, and he probably has better footwork as well from what I've seen. I do like his striking skills overall, and I think that's really going to give him an edge when it comes to the stand-up fight. I actually think he's going to be able to get a KO or a TKO, maybe in the first or the second round, because Viacheslav's the kind of fighter who can get a stoppage even in the second round. He could really put those technical skills on and get that TKO, so keep that in mind. Now, I will say that when it comes to James Llontop's weaknesses, he's not really known for his ground game, so that might be... It could be kind of exploited by Borshchev if he wants to grapple a little bit or do some wrestling exchanges. And I think that James is also susceptible to striking. Looking at some of his past performances, I've picked up that he kind of struggles with opponents that have a bit of a superior striking skill set, especially when they're more experienced strikers. So that's a key thing to keep in mind. I think as far as strategy goes, it's going to be pretty simple for Viacheslav, especially if I've picked up his game correctly. I think he's going to focus on striking a lot. He's going to avoid the ground exchanges, but even if it gets kind of messy like that, he should be able to control himself through those. And I think that he might have a slight edge when it comes to grappling, but still, he's going to focus on striking. He's going to keep the fight on the feet. And he's also going to be very defensively aware. I think that when you're fighting someone like James Llontop, who has momentum on his side, and he kind of has this he has this potential to land some significant strikes when you look at his game. So I think that keeping a strong, defensive posture overall throughout the fight will be key in strategy for Viacheslav Borshchev to keep in mind. So all things considered, I do expect him to get a KO/TKO probably in the first or second round overall, but yeah, that's the final verdict here. For the next fight, we have Zachary Reese versus Jose Medina. Let's go and review their stats here. Zachary is 6 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 77 inches, and he's 30 years old. Now, on the other hand, Jose is 6 feet tall, so he has a 4-inch height disadvantage here. He has a reach of 74 inches, so he has a 3-inch reach disadvantage, and he's 33 years old, so he's 3 years older. Now, again, due diligence here. Before I get into these stats, I do want to let you guys know that Jose's stats come from only one single fight. So when it comes to striking, Zachary lands 5.32 strikes per minute at a 66% accuracy. Now, Jose, on the other hand, based on that one fight, he landed 1.6 strikes per minute with a 26% accuracy. And when it comes to defense, Zachary absorbs 6.21 strikes per minute with a 27% striking defense and no takedown defense really recorded. And Jose, on the other hand, he absorbs 4.87 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a 14% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Zachary Reese's recent fight history. Now recently he's coming off of a win against Julian Marquez via KO/TKO, which was back in June of 2024, just a couple months ago. So his total record, 7 wins and only 1 loss. Out of those 7 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 were submissions, and he doesn't have any decision victories, which gives him a 100% finishing rate. Now, out of his 1 loss, it was a KO/TKO loss. He does have 7 first-round finishes out of his 7 wins, so 100% of his finishes are in the very first round. Recently, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights. He is coming off of a win into this particular fight. His most recent win was back in June of this year, and his most recent loss was back in December of last year. Now let's take a look at Jose's recent fight history. Now recently, Jose is coming off of a loss against Magomed, which was via unanimous decision and back in October of last year. Now his total record, 11 wins and only 3 losses. Out of those 11 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs and 2 were submissions, and he only had 1 fight that went to the decision, and he got that victory, which does give him a very impressive 91% finishing rate. Now his 3 losses are broken down by 1 submission loss and 2 decision losses. He has 6 first-round finishes, pretty impressive. He's recently won 4 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this particular fight. His most recent win was back in March of 2023. His most recent loss was back in October of 2023. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't run these two through my prediction models because of the debut here. However, the odd probabilities are giving Zachary Reese a 76% probability of victory. And I generally agree with that because Zachary does have a height advantage of 4 inches here. He is 3 years younger. He has a reach advantage of 3 inches. He lands 3.72 more strikes per minute. He has a 40% higher striking accuracy. He seems to be the more active fighter overall when it comes to fights. Now, he has won 7 fights. He's finished all of them. He's had 2 UFC fights, of which he only won 1. He lost to Cody Brundage via KO/TKO. That was back in the Darius versus Sarukian card back in December of last year. But anyways, he is coming off of a win into this particular fight. Recently, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, so he has quite a bit of momentum on his side. But let's talk about those reasons, aside from stats alone, as to why Zachary's likely going to win. There's several key factors in this fight that are leaning towards Zachary's favor here. Now, he did have that crazy 20-second KO victory over Julian, and I mean, the guy's absolutely vicious when it comes to fights. I mean, his striking power is through the roof. He's able to finish fights quickly as he wants. He's always in that first round, giving it everything he absolutely has, and in a very intelligent fashion. He's not dumb with it either, and it's worked for him for quite a few fights. Now, here's the thing. Medina, he's coming off of that loss in Dana White's Contender Series, and I think that, you know, he's just not going to be the most confident fighter in the octagon that night, and I think that Zachary's going to capitalize on that weakness. Zachary has faced a couple of high pressure situations, and I think that that's kind of trained his psychology when it comes to fighting over Medina, who's just going to be debuting. He hasn't done too well. His striking stats don't look very hot. He just looks kind of sluggish overall. I think Zachary's going to shut him down, and I think that's pretty obvious here. I will say I do like Reese's knockout power and his technical advantage here, and I think that coupled with the motivation I just spoke about should, you know, give him the victory, and it just positions him to be the likely victor here. I just don't think that Medina's a very good fighter, if I'm being honest, and I think that this has Reese written all over him. I think the UFC wants him to get this victory here and continue his crazy, you know, first round finish streak. But overall, just given his recent performances, his experience, and the motivation he's going to have coming into this fight, I think he will be the better fighter. He should be able to get it done. And I think he's going to catch Medina slipping. I think Zachary's going to get a KO/TKO in the first round again and add another victory to his win column. For the next fight, we have Danny Silva versus Dennis Buzukja. Let's go and review their stats here. Danny is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches, and he's 27 years old. Now, very similarly, Dennis is 5 feet 9 inches tall, so he has a 2-inch height disadvantage here, but his reach is the exact same. He has a 70-inch reach, and he's just a year younger. He's 26 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Danny does land 8.3 strikes per minute at a 58% accuracy. That's very good volume. Now, Dennis, on the other hand, he only lands 4.16 strikes per minute at a 42% accuracy. Less volume, less accurate. Now, as far as grappling goes, Danny lands 3 takedowns on average at a 50% accuracy, while Dennis, he only lands 0.8 takedowns on average with a 30% accuracy. Less takedowns, less accurate. Now, lastly, when it comes to defense, Danny absorbs 9.47 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a pretty decent takedown defense, while Dennis, on the other hand, he absorbs far less strikes per minute, which is a great advantage. He only absorbs 5.09 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense, so his striking defense isn't as good, but he still absorbs much less, and he does have a 72% takedown defense as well. Now let's take a look at Danny Silva's recent fight history. Now, he's recently coming off of that win against Josh Kulibov via split decision back in March of 2024. His total record, 9 wins and only 1 loss. Those 9 wins are broken down by 5 KO/TKOs and 4 decision victories, which gives him a pretty even 56% finishing rate. Now, that one single loss was a decision loss. He does have 1 first-round finish. Recently, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 3-fight win streak coming into this fight. His most recent win back in March of this year. His most recent loss was back in December of 2022. Now let's take a look at Dennis Buzukja's recent fight history. Now Dennis is coming off of that win against Connor Matthews, which was via KO/TKO back in March of this year. Now his total record, 12 wins and 4 losses. Out of those 12 wins, 5 of those were KO/TKOs, 1 was submission, and 6 were decision victories, which does give him a perfectly even 50% finishing rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 1 of those was a KO/TKO, and the remaining 3 were decision losses. He has 4 first round finishes. Recently he's won 3 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was back in March of 2024, and his most recent loss was actually back in November of last year. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and then my final pick that takes all of that and also incorporates other non-stat based research and fight film study observations and takes all of that into account as well. So 7 of my prediction models right off the bat are leaning towards Danny Silva, and none are leaning towards Dennis. When I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 66.8% probability of victory for Danny. Now, after doing some research outside of the statistics as well, and watching some of their previous fights, I think that that's actually a fair prediction here. And it's due to the fact that Danny Silva does have the height advantage of 2 inches here. Keep in mind, he lands 4.14 more strikes per minute, which is a lot more strikes per minute, crazy volume, and he has a 16% better striking accuracy with that. He also has a 14% higher striking defense, despite him taking on a lot of shots himself, and he lands 2.2 more takedowns on average. Also, he has a 20% higher takedown accuracy, he has a 28% higher takedown defense, and he lands slightly more submissions on average as well. So statistically, this guy is the better fighter, but let's talk about those reasons outside of stats as well. But first, let me recap their record here. So Danny Silva, he's won 9 fights, finished 56% of them. He's had 1 UFC fight, and he did win that fight, recently winning 4 of his last 5 fights, and coming off of 3 back-to-back-to-back victories. Last time he lost was all the way back in December of 2022, so it's been quite a while. Crazy momentum. He's been doing very well. So let's talk about those reasons aside from stats alone here. So Danny does have a lot of potential advantages here that could lead to his victory easily over Dennis. So let's break it down. For starters, when it comes to striking advantage, Danny Silva is very well known for his powerful striking. He averages a lot of strikes per minute, and that's extremely high. That pace that he keeps is a very, very high pace in the octagon, and that's a lot of pressure that he keeps on fighters throughout his fights. And I think that him utilizing his striking power and that kind of volume is likely going to keep Dennis on the defensive and potentially lead to a knockout. And also just over time, if the fight kind of plays out towards the second or third round, keep in mind that volume builds up kind of exponentially. The damage that it causes, it stacks up very, very quickly based on that volume. And we've seen that Dennis doesn't really land that kind of volume. So keep that in mind. Also, when it comes to takedown and grappling, Silva has demonstrated some pretty good takedown skills. He lands more than 1 takedown per round in some of his previous fights. He has a good takedown defense as well. So I think he could counter or neutralize some of Buzukja's wrestling attempts, if any. So he can control the grappling exchanges, he can kind of maintain that top position overall, and I think that Silva will be able to dictate the pace of this fight, even if it goes to the ground or some of those grappling type of exchanges. One other thing I want to highlight is leg kicks. He incorporates calf kicks, and I think that that's going to be a very strategic advantage here for Silva. He's going to be able to disrupt Buzukja's rhythm with those, kind of limit his mobility overall, and that will likely help him neutralize some of Buzukja's striking and wrestling setups, which again, he doesn't really have very many when it comes to a volume compared to Danny Silva here. So overall, I think that when it comes to controlling a fight's pace and location, whether it's standing or even on the ground, Danny Silva is the better fighter when it comes to that, at least in my opinion. I think he's going to be able to use his technical striking, some of those grappling skills as well. He should be able to manage the fight's overall dynamic and eventually wear down Buzukja over the course of those 3 rounds. Eventually, I do see this going to the judges via decision. I don't think Danny's going to get the finish here, but that's how I see this fight playing out. For the next fight, we have actually a really good fight. We have Edmen Shahbazyan versus Gerald Meerschaert. Let's go and review their stats here. Edmen is 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 75 inches, and he's 26 years old. Now, on the other hand, Gerald is 6 feet 1 inch tall, so he's 1 inch shorter. He has a reach of 77 inches, though, so he has a 2 inch better reach, and he is 36 years old, so he has a 10-year age gap right there. he is the older fighter here. So when it comes to striking, Edmen lands 3.6 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. Now Gerald, on the other hand, he lands 3.18 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. That's pretty close when it comes to the two of these guys. As far as grappling goes, Edmen lands 2.24 takedowns on average at a 38% accuracy, and Gerald, on the other hand, he lands 2.17 takedowns on average with a 38% accuracy. So when it comes to grappling, both of these guys, again, very similar when it comes to stats on paper. Now lastly, when it comes to Edmen's defense, he absorbs 4.09 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and a 63% takedown defense. And Gerald, he absorbs 3.37 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a 34% takedown defense. That's relatively the same except for that takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Edmen Shahbazyan's recent fight record. So he is coming off of a win against AJ Dobson via KO/TKO back in March of 2024. His total record, 13 wins and 4 losses. Those 13 wins are broken down by 11 KO/TKOs, 1 submission victory, and 1 decision victory, which gives him a very high 92.4% finishing rate. Out of his 4 losses, 3 of those were KO/TKOs, and the other 1 was a decision loss. He does have 11 first-round finishes. Recently, though, he's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was back in March of this year, and his most recent loss was back in May of last year. Now let's take a look at Gerald Meerschaert's recent fight history. So he's coming off of that win against Brian Barberena via submission, which was back in March of this year. His total record, 36 wins and 17 losses. That's a crazy amount of wins. Out of those 36 wins, 6 of those were KO/TKOs, 28 were submissions. That's insane. And 2 were decision victories. That gives him a very high 95% finishing rate thanks to all of those submissions. Out of those 17 losses, 4 of those were KO/TKO losses, 8 were submission losses, and 5 were decision losses. He has 15 first-round finishes, but recently, similar to his opponent, he's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, but he's coming off of a win into this fight, very similar to his opponent. Now, his most recent win back in March of 2024, his most recent loss was back in August of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted for this fight, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations, takes all of that into account as well. So right off the bat, 7 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Edmen Shahbazyan and none are leaning towards Gerald Meerschaert. When I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 65.5% probability of victory for Edmen. For my final prediction, I'm going to boost that up a little bit. I'm giving Edmen a 69% probability of victory. As due to the fact that he has a height advantage of an inch here, he's 10 years younger, and that's huge. 26 versus 36. I mean, that's massive. He lands 0.42 more strikes per minute. He has a 7% higher striking accuracy. He lands 0.08 more takedowns on average as well, and he has a 29% higher takedown defense. He's won 13 fights, finished 92% of those. He's had 10 UFC fights, of which he's won 6, which is pretty good overall. Recently, he's won 2 of his last 5, of course. Not too good, but he is coming off of a win into this fight. Now, let's talk about those reasons aside from stats alone. Edmen Shahbazyan, he has a lot of striking advantages when it comes to this particular matchup against Gerald Meerschaert. Keep in mind, Gerald Meerschaert, he kind of starts his fights off slow. If you look at his previous fights, he's kind of slow to get the ball rolling here, and I think that that's where Shahbazyan's going to shine. He's going to use his aggression early on, apply that pressure in order to take that lead, and even maybe get a KO/TKO into this fight. So here's the thing, Shahbazyan, he lands those huge strikes, and if he's able to do that before Meerschaert can get comfortable or, you know, effectively implement the game plan that he usually does with his grappling, try to take the fight to the ground, if he can negate that by starting off very strong and getting a quick finish, that would really, not only do I think that there's a strong chance of him doing that, but that would pretty much shut Meerschaert immediately down. Also keep in mind, Shahbazyan, he has this ability to defend against takedowns, at least statistically. So I think that a key thing in this fight will be his ability to shut down Meerschaert's takedown attempts. If he struggles with that, if he's not able to do that, then maybe we see this fight tilt in a different direction. But I think based on everything I've seen and studied, he should be able to neutralize and stuff those takedown attempts. So as long as he does that, as long as he keeps the fight standing where he holds a very clear advantage and he starts off very aggressively and strong, he should be able to pull off a victory here. Now, I really like Shahbazyan's striking advantages here in this fight, and I think that even though Meerschaert has some experience and really good grappling skills, and when I say some experience, I mean a lot of experience, and he has those grappling skills, I still think that Shahbazyan's striking power and his speed will be keys in giving him the victory in this fight. So Final verdict for this fight, I think Edmen's actually going to catch Gerald in the first round and get a KO/TKO. I think that there's a good chance of that happening as long as he does the logical thing in this fight. Now, sometimes fighters will go in the octagon, and I don't understand why this happens. They just implement the absolute worst game plan, something that it's extremely obvious on how they should execute their game plan, but for some reason they switch it up and they do something completely different. So as long as he's done some homework, as long as he's trained and his coaches have helped him out, he should be able to realize that, hey, Gerald starts off slow. Let me go in very aggressively. Let me get this finish here, and put on a show for some fans here. For the next fight, we have another good fight. We have Neil Magny versus Michael Morales. Let's go and review their stats here. Neil Magny, 6 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 80 inches, and he's 37 years old. Now, on the other hand, Michael Morales is 6 feet tall, so he has a 3-inch height disadvantage here, but he has a reach of 79 inches, pretty close, but he still has a 1-inch reach disadvantage, and he's 25 years old, so he's 12 years younger, and that's huge. When it comes to striking, Neil lands 3.47 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy. Now, Michael, on the other hand, he lands a lot more strikes. He lands 5.28 strikes per minute, but at a similar accuracy of 46%. As far as grappling goes, Neil Magny lands 2.17 takedowns on average at a 40% accuracy, while Michael, on the other hand, lands 1.24 takedowns on average, about half, but still at a 41% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Magny absorbs 2.42 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a 54% takedown defense, while as Michael, he absorbs a little bit more. He absorbs 3.6 strikes per minute with a 52% striking defense and a 91% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Neil Magny's recent fight history. Now recently, Magny is coming off of a win against Mike Malone via KO/TKO back in January of this year. His total record, 29 wins and 12 losses. Out of those 29 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, 4 were submissions, and 17 were decision victories, which gives him a 41% finishing rate, but he's able to control fights and get the decision victory more times than he's not. That's kind of where this guy excels. Out of his 12 losses, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 were submissions, and 3 were decision losses. Now, out of all of those victories, he only has 1 first-round finish, and if that doesn't tell you that he's a decision type of fighter, nothing will. So recently he's won 3 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off a win into this fight. Even though he's 36 years old, he's done pretty well overall. His most recent win back in January of this year, his most recent loss was back in August of last year. Now let's take a look at Michael Morales' recent fight history. Now recently, Michael is coming off of that win against Jake Matthews, which was via unanimous decision back in November of last year. Now his total record, he's undefeated, 16 wins, no losses. Out of those 16 wins, 11 KO/TKOs, 1 submission, and 4 decision victories, giving him a 75% finishing rate. Now, he does have 7 first-round finishes, and he's on that 16-fight win streak, of course. Most recent win he has was back in November of last year. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted for this fight, their weighted average, and then my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations and takes all of that into account as well. All of my prediction models are leaning towards Michael Morales here, and there's several reasons why. But when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting an 80.9% probability of victory in favor of Michael Morales. And after doing all my research outside of stats as well, I do agree with that prediction. And here's the reason. So the guy is 12 years younger than Neil Magny. He lands 1.81 more strikes per minute. He has a slightly better takedown accuracy, and he has a 37% higher takedown defense. He's won 16 fights and not lost a single one. He's finished 75% of those. He's already had 4 fights in the UFC, and he's won all 4 of those, and he's on that 16-fight win streak. So let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone as to why Neil Magny will likely lose in this fight against Michael Morales. I think it boils down to quite a few factors, and I'll go through all of them with you guys. For starters, it does boil down to youth and his overall undefeated record and his momentum. Keep in mind that Morales is in the absolute peak of his physical form, and he's entering, or starting to improve on and entering in his prime in his professional fighting career. So that's going to be absolutely crucial because he has that confidence on his side. But let's kind of go a little bit more into his game here. I like his striking power and his technique specifically. He's shown that he has significant striking power in some of his previous fights. He's able to land some very clean and effective strikes, and I think that that's going to pose a huge challenge for Magny, who has been susceptible to powerful strikers in the past. Again, that guy is more used to controlling fights, taking it to the judges, but what do you do if you have a very aggressive fighter who uses a lot of technique with that? Now, I will also say that I like Morales' overall improvement and adaptability throughout his fighting career. I see a lot of steady improvements in his game when I watch some of his earlier fights and I watch his more recent fights, and I think that because he's taken that time to kind of refine his skills in between fights like that, it should just make him a better fighter every time he shows up in the octagon. I like his reach and his physicality as well. We touched base on that when I reviewed those stats. And look, I mean, no disrespect to Neil Magny. I mean, he's a seasoned veteran in the UFC. He's resilient. He has a very tactical approach when it comes to fighting. But sometimes I think when it comes to being youthful and having a strong striking ability and making those continuous improvements, we kind of know how the sport goes, right? Some of those seasoned vets, they just can't keep up with some of the new guys that come in and they have that skill. So all things considered, for those reasons and many, many more, I'm going to give the victory to Michael Morales. I don't think he's going to get the finish. I think Neil Magny, he's really good at taking the fight to the judges. Win or lose, he's very, very good at that. So I wouldn't be surprised if this does go to the judges for a decision, but I think Michael Morales is going to control the fight due to his striking overall compared to Neil. For the next fight, we have Angela Hill versus Tabatha Ricci. Let's go and review their stats here. Angela Hill is 5 feet 3 inches tall. She has a reach of 64 inches, and she is 39 years old. Keep that in mind. I know sometimes she doesn't really look that, but she is 39 years old. She's definitely on the late stage of her professional fighting career. Now, on the other hand, Tabatha Ricci, she's 5 feet 1 inch tall, so she has a 2-inch height disadvantage here. She has a reach of 61 inches. She has a 3-inch reach disadvantage, but she's 29 years old, 10 years younger. When it comes to striking, Angela Hill lands 5.38 strikes per minute at a 49% accuracy, and Tabatha Ricci, on the other hand, she lands 4.28 strikes per minute at a 37% accuracy, so less strikes, less accurate. Now, as far as grappling goes, Angela Hill lands 0.8 takedowns on average with a 33% accuracy, and Tabatha Ricci, on the other hand, she lands 2.99 takedowns on average at a 35% accuracy. So Tabatha Ricci, more accurate, lands more takedowns. Now lastly, when it comes to defense, Angela Hill absorbs 4.86 strikes per minute with a 61% striking defense and a 76% takedown defense, whereas Tabatha Ricci absorbs 4.94 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 77% takedown defense. And if you didn't catch that, that is very, very similar to each other in all three aspects of defense. Now let's take a look at Angela Hill's recent fight history. So Hill is coming off of that win against Luana Pinheiro via submission, which was back in May of this year. Now her total record, 17 wins and 13 losses. Not the best record, but she's done pretty decent recently overall. Like definitely in the later stages of her career, she's done better. So out of her 17 wins, 5 of those were KO/TKOs, 1 was submission, and 11 were decision victories, which gives her a very low 35% finishing rate. Out of her 13 losses, 2 were submissions, 11 were decision losses. So sometimes when the fight goes on and heads towards the judges for a decision, she doesn't really maintain control of fights. Now she does have 1 first round finish. Recently she's won 4 of her last 5 fights, so again, like I said, she's done much better later on in her career than early on, and recently she's on a 2-fight win streak as well, which is good. Her most recent win was back in May of 2024, and her most recent loss was back in May of 2023. Now, on the other hand, let's take a look at Tabatha Ricci's recent fight history. Now, she's recently coming off of a win against Tisha Pennington via split decision back in May of 2024. Her total record, 10 wins and only 2 losses. Out of those 10 wins, 1 was a KO/TKO, 3 were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which does give her a 40% finishing rate. Out of her 2 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO and 1 was a decision loss. She does have 2 first-round finishes. Recently, she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, and she's coming off of a win into this fight. Her most recent win was back in May of 2024, and her most recent loss was back in November of last year. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted. Their weighted average, and then the final pick that takes all of that and also incorporates non-stat based research and fight film study observations takes all of that into account. 5 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Angela Hill, and 2 are leaning towards Tabatha Ricci. When I weigh those together, I'm getting a 53% probability for Angela Hill. It's pretty narrow overall, and after I did all my research, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Tabatha Ricci a very narrow 50.9% probability of victory, as due to the fact that Tabatha Ricci is the much younger fighter. She lands 2.19 more takedowns on average, she has a 2% higher takedown accuracy, slightly better takedown defense, and lands a little bit more submissions on average as well. She's won 10 fights, finished 40% of them, she's only lost twice, she's had 7 UFC fights and she's won 5 of those, and recently she's won 4 of her last 5 fights. And she's coming off of that win. I think she's a really good underdog on this card. She has a lot of value and potential in my opinion. But there's also stylistic reasons and research that made me lean towards Tabatha Ricci instead of Angela Hill. Not just her age alone, but a lot of other stuff as well. And I'll break that down right now. For starters, I think when it comes to a grappling advantage, Tabatha Ricci, she's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Keep that in mind. She also has a really good background in judo, and I think that she has a huge advantage if the fight gets taken to the ground. So if she's able to get the fight to the mat, she should be able to control the fight with some of her, superior grappling skills and that ground control. Somewhere where Angela might struggle a little bit with, especially when considering her age. I mean, whether she wants to admit or not, her physicality is deteriorating as she's getting older. Being 39 years old, you're definitely not a 30-year-old. You're definitely not a 25-year-old. You could be healthy and fit and even get wins like Angela Hill has. She's done very well recently, especially for her age, but it still has an impact on your game overall. Every single time you fight, it takes a little bit away from you. Based on that, I touch base on youth and athleticism. I do think that Ricci will be kind of the fighter that has a little bit better endurance and speed in this fight. She should be able to maintain a very high pace throughout the fight, and that might also kind of outlast Hill, especially in the later rounds. Recently, Ricci has also done very well. She's had submission victories. She won against Pennington, and I think she's able to perform well, especially against experienced opponents, and I don't see why this fight would go any different, if I'm being honest. If Tabatha Ricci is smart coming into this fight, her strategy is going to involve using her grappling in order to neutralize Hill's striking. If she's able to implement that and close the distance and avoid some of those prolonged exchanges on the feet, then I definitely think that Ricci can leverage her ground game to control a fight. And even if it's not, finishing the fight via submission, I think that she should be able to control the fight in general, and get the fight to the judges and get a unanimous decision victory over Angela Hill. I think that there's more avenues for Ricci to get a victory here than Angela. I think Angela, you kind of know what you can expect with her as a fighter. She's a good fighter, I'll give her that, but I am leaning towards the underdog here. For the next fight, we have our main event, Gerald Cannonier versus Caio Borralho. This is going to be a great fight, so let's review their stats here. Jared is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 77 inches, and he's 40 years old. Keep that in mind. This card has a lot of seasoned veterans. That's fancy words for older fighters. So when it comes to Caio Borralho, he's 6 feet 1 inch tall, so he's 3 inches taller than Gerald Cannonier. He has a reach of 75 inches, so he has a 2-inch reach disadvantage, but he is 31 years old, so he's 9 years younger than his opponent, Gerald. When it comes to striking, Cannonier lands 4.62 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. Now, Borralho, on the other hand, he lands less at 2.91 strikes per minute, but at a better accuracy of 60%. As far as grappling goes, Gerald lands 0.47 takedowns on average at a 46% accuracy, while Caio Borralho, on the other hand, he lands 1.99 takedowns on average with a 63% accuracy. Now, lastly, when it comes to the defense aspect of the game, Gerald Cannonier, he absorbs 4.19 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a 61% takedown defense, whereas Caio Borralho, he absorbs 2.06 strikes per minute, half as many, so he's way better when it comes to absorbing strikes. He has a 60% striking defense, so about the same, with a 76% takedown defense, a better takedown defense than Cannonier. Now let's take a look at Gerald Cannonier's recent fight history. Now recently, Jared's coming off of a loss against Nasiruddin Imavov, which was via KO/TKO back in June of this year, just a few months ago. Now his total record, 17 wins and 7 losses. Out of those 17 wins, 10 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which does give him a 71% finishing rate. Out of his 7 losses, 3 of those were KO/TKOs, and the remaining 4 were decision losses. He has 7 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this particular fight. His most recent win was back in June of last year, and his most recent loss was in June of this year. Now let's take a look at Caio Borralho's recent fight history. Now recently, Caio's coming off of that win against Paul Craig via KO/TKO back in May of this year. His total record, 16 wins and only 1 loss. Out of those 16 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 4 were submissions, and 7 were decision victories, which does give him a 56% finishing rate. His one single loss was a decision loss. He does have 6 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights. He's actually on a 13-fight win streak, which is insane. His most recent win was back in May of 2024. His most recent loss was all the way back in July of 2015. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-stat based research and fight film study observations and takes all that into account as well. So right off the bat, none of my prediction models are leaning towards Gerald Cannonier here, and all 7 are leaning towards Caio Borralho. And when I weigh those prediction models together, I'm getting a 61.4% probability of victory for Caio. Now, after doing some research outside of stats as well, I think that that is a fair assessment He does have a height advantage of 2 inches here. He's 9 years younger. He has a 8% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs 2.13 less strikes per minute. He has a 2% higher striking defense. He lands 1.5 more takedowns on average. He has a 17% higher takedown accuracy and a 15% higher takedown defense. This guy is very clearly on paper a good fighter. Now, he has won 16 fights. He's finished 56% of those. He's had 6 fights within the UFC, and he's won all 6 of those. Recently, he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 13-fight win streak. That's an absolutely insane resume to go through right now. But let's talk about those reasons, aside from stats alone, as to why Caio Borralho, why he can defeat Jared Cannonier in this fight this weekend. So, for starters, I think when it comes to wrestling and grappling, Jared Cannonier, he's known for his powerful striking, and he's fought in a lot of weight classes, and that makes him a challenging opponent when it comes to the feet. But Borralho, when it comes to being a wrestler, he's very, very skilled, and he could focus in this fight on taking the fight to the ground repeatedly, where I think that he's going to have the advantage. And if he controls Cannonier on the mat, he's probably going to be able to neutralize a lot of Cannonier's striking power and kind of work towards having a submission, or even kind of landing a lot of those ground and pound strikes that's going to push the fight in his favor. Also, here's the thing, Borralho, he's not really known for his knockout power, but I think that he can still use his striking to kind of keep Cannonier at bay and continue to score some points and control the fight with striking. He uses like some quick jabs and those leg kicks that really work well for him. And he has some good movement too within the octagon. So as long as he can avoid Cannonier's heavy punches that he swings, and he just kind of wears him down over the course of the fight, it should play out in his favor, especially if you utilize some grappling with that. Then you should be able to get that victory compared to Cannonier here. And also, when you factor in his youth and cardio, keep in mind Cannonier is kind of old. He's not going to have the same exact endurance as Borralho, who's younger and kind of faster as well. So Borralho, he's going to be able to push that pace and kind of test Cannonier's cardio, especially when it comes to those later rounds. And I could see him kind of getting an advantage in that aspect as well. So Borralho is a very versatile threat when it comes to the octagon. He's good at striking. He's good at grappling. He has some knockout power, as we've seen in some of his fights that he's finished. And he's also very motivated to kind of break into the rankings here and continue to drive up the ladder, right? So he's performed well since his debut. I like how he looks, and I like the advantages he holds here. He's also had 2 fights in Dana White's Contender Series, and he won both of those. It was back in Season 5, Week 5 and 8. It was in 2021. And so one of those he got a KO/TKO in, and the other he got a unanimous decision victory in. So he's used to some high pressures type of situations. He's done well overall, and he's kind of in the spotlight. He's young. The world's his oyster. I think he's going to be able to get the victory here. I don't necessarily think that he's going to be able to finish Cannonier, especially given Cannonier's experience and his fighting style overall. It's going to be very hard to finish a guy like that, but I do see Borralho kind of using everything in his arsenal to control the fight, whether it's sometimes taking the fight to the ground and doing some damage there, or just holding him and kind of controlling him, trying to look for an advantageous position, or kind of just keeping his distance on the feet, staying away from some of those powerful shots that Cannonier throws. Hopefully he doesn't get caught, because if he does, then it's game over for Borralho. But I just don't see it happening, especially considering the physicality of both of these guys, their age, and Borralho, he's just stepping into his prime. 16 wins, only 1 loss. Final verdict, I will go for Borralho via decision. I think he's going to get the unanimous decision victory, and I think it's going to be a pretty good main event. And with that, those are all of the fights for this weekend's event. I hope you all enjoyed the analysis and that your bets hit. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos. Running this data, analysis, prediction models, and creating charts and graphs takes hours every day and week, so your support is always appreciated. Please also check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me through there. There's a $10 a month contribution option and a premium $20 a month option, which comes with early access to all of the analysis from this video, as well as promising underdogs, favorites, prop bets, and all of the extra data analysis and stats as well. This analysis, information, and these stats will help you with your bets, and it'll help support my efforts to continue providing and expanding content for you all. So please check out that Patreon if you want to show me some love and help me out there. Thank you all once again for watching, and as always, see you guys in the next one.